Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's event and education conversation. My name is Caitlin Phillips. I am a fellow educator in Baltimore County. I am an advocate for children, students, and I'm an advocate for teachers. Um, and it is my absolute pleasure this evening to have the opportunity to be introducing our moderator for the evening, the lovely Miss Brianna Ross, that I have had the opportunity to get to know over the last few years. And so, again, it is my absolute pleasure this evening to introduce her. Brianna Ross has forged a reputation for being a passionate student advocate who views teaching as a revolutionary act of love. Ross graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a Bachelor of Science in Applied Developmental Psychology and a Master of Education in Curriculum and Instruction. With a certificate in administration and supervision from Loyola University of Maryland, Ross is pursuing the doctoral degree in urban educational leadership from Morgan State University. A former elementary school teacher, she now teaches sixth grade world history and serves as the social studies department chair at Deer Park Middle Magnet School in Randallstown, Maryland. As her school's equity liaison, Ross works to interrupt teacher biases and practices that perpetuate inequity while building teacher capacity to create inclusive classrooms. Ross writes social studies curriculum that highlights more diverse perspectives, connects historical topics to current events, and encourages students to find solutions to real world problems. Each year, Ross coordinates a summer transition program to support incoming sixth graders socially, emotionally, and academically as they prepare for the expectations of middle school. Ross was a New Leaders Council Fellow in 2018 and worked with other change makers to identify progressive solutions for a more sustainable and equitable future in Maryland. In April of 2021, Brianna was named the Baltimore County Teacher of the Year. The following October, she was named the 2022 Maryland, the entire state, Teacher of the Year. Ross travels around the state as an educational speaker and advisor. As a teacher of Black and Brown students, Ross believes that teaching must be grounded in love. She knows that it is critical to create space where students of color can show up as their authentic selves and know that they are loved, valued, and seen. So without further ado, Miss Brianna Ross, Maryland Teacher of the Year, Baltimore County Public School Teacher of the Year, and our moderator for our conversation this evening.
Thank you, Kaylin. That was such a wonderful introduction, and good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to have been asked to participate in this conversation around education and how we can make education more progressive, more equitable for the students in the 10th Legislative District. I have taught here for the last 7 years in both Randallstown and I live in Windsor Mill and I teach in Owens Mills. And so I'm really invested in the students in our community. And I know that our candidate, Mr. N. Scott Phillips, who is running for delegate for the 10th Legislative District, is incredibly committed to the students in our committee, in our community. So we have about an hour to discuss the questions that you all pose. So we are going to try our best to get to as many of them as we can. I know that Mr. Phillips has a lot of really wonderful thoughts. So we'll see how much we get to because there's so much to say about what we can do to make education better. But I'm going to take a second just to introduce him and the work that he does. Scott Phillips is an advocate for small businesses, education, community, and economic development. In his professional life, he's been a corporate executive for a Fortune 100 company and an entrepreneur running a law firm and a consulting practice. In that consulting work, he currently manages a federal program that is focused on growing businesses. His educational background includes a law degree from the University of Maryland Carey School of Law, an accounting degree from Virginia Union University, and he is a product of our own Baltimore County Public Schools right in Woodlawn High School, right around the corner from me. So he knows he has a real insight on what BCPS schools are like. He volunteers his time and his talents in numerous organizations to include his role as a founder of the Black Professional Men Incorporated, the trustee of Virginia Union University. He's a member of the Baltimore County Revenue Authority Board of Directors. He's a former chair of the Baltimore County Planning Board, the Superintendent's Business Advisory Board, and numerous other boards and commissions. So he has his hands in lots of volunteer pots in our community. He is a servant leader who is committed to making a positive difference. As John Lewis once said, as a nation, if we care for the beloved community, we must move our feet, our hands, our hearts, and our resources to build up and not tear down, to reconcile and not to divide, and to love and not hate. And this is what Mr. Phillips lives by. And he lives by these two simple concepts: for whom much is given, much is required. And if it is to be, it is up to me. He is married to his wife, Valerie, who he's been married to for 35 years, and he has two gorgeous daughters, Erin and my very good friend, Kaylin. So I am honored to introduce him. I'm going to turn it over to him to share a few thoughts with you before we get started.
Thank you, Brianna, and I really want to thank you. You have set a real example as not only Baltimore County's Teacher of the Year, but also the state of Maryland. I hail from a family. My mother was a teacher, and of course, I have a daughter that's a teacher. Somehow it skipped me, but hopefully in what I do, I'm also educating people along the way. I'm excited to have this conversation this evening. I'm actually feeling a little funny. I'm usually on the other side asking questions. Several years ago, the superintendent had asked me to do interviews. And so I had the good fortune of interviewing Buck Showalter for a group of students, and then more recently, Wes Moore. So this is a little different for me being on this side, but I really thank you. I am a member of the District 10 Unity team. And for those who came on early enough to see the flyer, you saw our team members. And yes, we are running for offices, state offices here in the Northwest section of the county. And I'm excited about that. But I don't want to talk a lot about that this evening. I do want to get engaged in the conversation around education. I do want to acknowledge, I believe Jennifer White is here and she's participating. And hopefully at the end of this, I'll give Jennifer, Speaker Adrian Jones, and Ben Brooks a moment to say a few words. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for that as well. But I wanted to get into this conversation, to be able to engage in conversation with you of some of my thoughts around education, and to also listen to you, because I'm sure the questions will also inform me. Because when it happens and when I become a delegate, I want to make sure that I'm hearing from teachers, students, parents. But I just think this is an important opportunity for me to engage in conversation and for your fellow teachers and administrators to hear my thoughts.
Absolutely. Well, we're putting you in the hot seat today, so it's okay that you're on the other side of it because we're excited about it.
Okay.
So we're going to jump right in. And I think the first thing that I think is important to know as a teacher, and for the other teachers who are here on this call, is just sort of what does that role look like for you in the House of Delegates, and sort of what effect can you have, and what control do you have to make positive change in education in the 10th district as a member of the House of Delegates?
That is a great question. Often I think folks have this idea of politicians and what they can do, elected officials, and sometimes they're disappointed because they feel like there's things that they didn't get done that they could have. And I will say to you that there are really three things that I look at from an elected official and their ability to do. Two of them are what I would call statutory or constitutional, right? As an elected official, you have the responsibility for appropriating resources, right? Those are the dollars. Appropriation and budgeting, that would be number one, and figuring out how to carve up tax dollars and other funds to apply to any situation, but in our case, it's education. And I will say that in Baltimore County, over 50% of the budget is really dedicated to K through 12 education. So it gets the lion's share. Part of that appropriation, though, is also figuring out, in some instances, being a little prescriptive about where that money is spent. whether it's spent in capital and building schools or it's spent in programs and resources. So number one, I would say would be, this appropriation and the money and funding. Number two, which is also statutory in nature, is policies. What are the policies that our elected officials are enacting through legislation that changes the way we handle schools? And those policies could be anything from, how many days in school. We give some of that to the State Board of Education, but it comes through the legislature as well. What are the expectations of a teacher and teacher qualifications and education? How long should we be in school? What's appropriate in terms of curriculum, right? At some point that may pass through the legislature, things that are emphasized because we think that they're important for our community as a whole, right? They're cultural things. When you think about kind of the volunteer hours, right? Those are things that really came out of the legislature to say we need students to have learning hours and participate, because that's another piece of our community that's important. So those are policy related issues. But then the third thing, it doesn't come from statutory authority. It doesn't come from constitutional kind of authority. It really, I believe, comes from each delegate taking it upon themselves to use the position, the power, the influence that it provides to affect change. And so that may not happen in Annapolis, right? It may not happen with the budget. It may happen because we see something or a constituent says that this is important. It may get down to the grassroots, right? It may be, because of where we sit, we have the ability to influence scholarship dollars from the philanthropic community. And I believe as a legislator, you need to use those tools as well to bring those additional dollars into the schoolhouse. Maybe it's working with businesses in the community and saying to them, Randallstown Elementary School, really could use a playground, right? How do that may not come from state funds, but that may come from the influence that you're able to apply to get those things done. I can remember, and some of those things happen even outside of being an elected official. I can remember doing tie day at Randallstown. There was a young man that used to do tie day, and every year I got excited about going up to the school, not only to give away ties, but to wear a tie and to have the little, the fourth, fifth, and sixth, fourth, and fifth graders, show them how to tie ties. It was an exciting time for me. So you've got the statutory or constitutional things that a legislator can do, but then you have those things that come with the power of the office, with the influence of the office.
Okay, so there's so much that you said that we gotta go back on. But let me start with the first two things, which were around one, the budget, and the policy. So I'll say that as a teacher this year, and I'm sure my fellow teachers here on this call can agree that this year has been challenging. It's been an interesting school year, and the way we've seen COVID affect our students and our teachers has been really interesting. So I'm wondering, from the combination of using the money that's available, like you said, 50% of the money that's allocated to Baltimore County goes to the schools. So how do you plan to use that money, but also create policy change that's going to create positive effects for our students in schools, specifically considering the fact that COVID has had such a serious effect, particularly on our social and emotional health and wellness of our students? How can you use the policy and the money to affect positive change in that arena?
So let's talk about the money first. One of the things that COVID has highlighted, right? It's not that we didn't know, but there are true inequities in our schools. And some of our communities have been affected more than others in terms of the socio-emotional impact on our students, right? And so from my perspective, we have to figure out how to leverage resources to address those concerns, and what type of resources, right? We clearly at this moment need more counseling type resources in our schools, right? Whether they're, whether they're psychologists, psychiatrists, or simply just advisors and mentors in the schools to begin to address some of these issues that have been exacerbated by this pandemic. But we have to realize that this is not a resetting, but this is an addressing. And what I mean by that is sometimes you have to deal with crisis management, and you have to pour resources where they need to go for that moment. And I believe we're in that time, right? As we're coming out of the pandemic, there are some residual effects, and we need to figure out how to apply resources that address those residual effects, but particularly that are pinpointed. Not everybody needs everything. Right? And so I get concerned about one size fits all and trying to say, well, every school needs XYZ, right? From a policy perspective, how do we deal with this, right? So from a policy perspective, in my mind, we really need to begin to think about, do we, and some of this has been addressed, right? Do we fail children because, right, they've had an achievement gap, which is due to social emotional kind of issues that they're dealing with? That may be that's probably more of a policy thing that needs to be addressed than a financial thing that needs to be addressed. From the State House, we need to begin to provide more latitude in school systems to figure out how to address those things. Once again, I'm not about being prescriptive from on high. I really do think that we have to provide latitude, flexibility for school systems to address those issues.
I'm thinking around this issue too, because I would agree with you that certainly when we think about issues of equity, not everybody needs the same thing. And if we just know about what our community looks like, especially at least for where I teach, I know where Kaylin teaches, the majority of our students are Black and Brown. We know that COVID impacted our communities at a much higher rate than other areas in Baltimore County and even in the state of Maryland. So I'm thinking around this issue of figuring out how do you know what everybody needs? And you mentioned something earlier about, when a constituent says something, how are you going to create opportunities for the constituents in the legislative, in District 10, to voice their concerns to you around what's happening in our schools, whether that be parents, students, teachers, educators, administrators? How are you going to create those sort of opportunities?
That's another really great question. I participated in a town hall meeting last week that was held by the county executive, and I like that format. We heard from a wide variety of constituents, stakeholders, from students to parents to those persons who were concerned about environmental issues, to wreck and parks, et cetera. I believe we can do the same thing specifically for education. Whether that is going around to various schools and doing town halls, which includes parents, teachers, students. The other thing that Baltimore County, I believe, does well, and I don't know if you're still doing it, I was involved with a few superintendents ago with crafting a survey, community survey. I think that's a wonderful tool, and legislators need to look at that and look at the results of those surveys, because I think they're informative on how we should operate, both from a policy perspective and a financing perspective. So looking at that. And then the other piece is listening and pulling in what I call focus groups. So I'm a business guy, right? And I'm also, that Fortune 100 company was IBM. So there's some IT background. And I believe data informs, and analyzing data and leveraging data to make good decisions is important. So I would look at, the data that comes out of surveys, engaging parents, teachers, community, through town halls, and then finally really leveraging some focus groups and bringing in small groups of people periodically, or making my rounds at the schools and just sitting down and having those small group conversations. From there, you get ideas, right? And you want to figure out how to plant those ideas, seed them so they grow.
Absolutely. So I feel like you and I are having our own little mini town hall. So I'll bring an issue that is of concern to me. So one of the things that I've seen certainly this year, and that we're seeing in Baltimore County and across the state of Maryland and in states across the country, is this issue around teacher shortages. And so we're seeing massive staff shortages in all the schools almost in Baltimore County, certainly in District 10 and then around the country. And so I'm wondering, how are you going to help Baltimore County schools recruit and retain really high quality teachers, in particular teachers of color? Because we also know that we have our teacher populations do not reflect the races, backgrounds, religious groups, the LGBT, they don't reflect the population of our students. So what is your plan to address one, teacher retention, but also recruiting a diverse workforce of teachers?
Yeah, man, these are really tough questions, but good questions.
It's a tough one.
Right? And I say they're tough because everybody is dealing with workforce related issues, right? I spend a lot of time in the manufacturing community, and just like, we're having a tough time recruiting teachers, we're having a very difficult time recruiting factory workers, right? So it's everywhere. I think there are a couple of ways that we can improve retention of teachers. Needless to say, money is one, right? Clearly, money is one.
Yeah.
Another is working with educators and financing systems to deal with teacher debt, right, when they come out of school. I think one way of incenting teachers to come into the profession is figuring out how to make sure all teachers, right, if they come into teaching as a profession, that any student loan debt, we figure out how to eliminate that.
I'm gonna send you my bill tonight. Don't worry.
Right? No, because I think that would be a major incentive to teachers to keep them in the system, right? The other thing is we've got to improve what happens in the schoolhouse. We've got to improve your teaching conditions, and that will help to retain teachers. In terms of increasing kind of the diversity of the teaching pool and those in K through 12 academia, you got to go to where folks are, right? So I'm a big proponent of historically Black colleges and universities. I am a graduate of an HBCU, right? But not just HBCUs. We've got to go to minority serving institutions, right? There are institutions that serve heavily, Native American populations, that serve Latina populations, Latinx populations. So you got to go to where those individuals are if we're going to kind of diversify it. And the other thing is, people have to see themselves in the system. We've got to figure out how to take younger people, right, children when they're young, and have them see themselves as a potential teacher down the road, right? How do we get them engaged in volunteer activities so we take a senior in high school and have them, tutor a sixth grader or a fifth grader in elementary school, right? How do we get people to think about teaching as a far more esteemed profession, right? I'm a little older, and when I was in school, teaching was one of the most prestigious, esteemed professions that anyone could have. So we've got to get back to that, right? The value. When you look at, from an international perspective, kind of versus the United States, when you go to other countries, teaching is just seen as one of the most important professions that anybody can participate in. So we've got to figure that out as well, right? Bringing that back.
Absolutely. This piece around, I think that's a really, really good point around how do we incentivize the teachers that we have, right? Because it is a valued profession, and I would argue one of the hardest jobs to have, especially right now. And so we certainly do have to think about how can we improve our teaching conditions. And we discussed around COVID a little bit earlier, but I think one of the other things that's making this really difficult for teachers is the just massive amount of grief and trauma and loss that our students have experienced, and especially the students in our community who have experienced this sort of trauma due to gun violence. What plan do you have, or how are the district meeting the needs of those families and communities who have suffered due to violence in the community? What does that look like for you in terms of support?
So grief counseling is real. There's an organization which I followed, Roberta's House, and they talk a lot, and they address kind of grief counseling. They're currently primarily dealing with Baltimore City public school students. I'm not aware of them dealing much with Baltimore County public school students. But we need more programs like Roberta's House that we use to engage. Because trauma, I am a big proponent of early childhood education, right? And that's not the topic, but I want to use that because one of the things that comes out of the studies is children between 1 and 5, if they're impacted with trauma in their early years, it will impact their ability to learn through life. That same thing is true with any child and any adult. And so we've got to figure out two things. Number one, how to make streets safer so children don't experience that trauma, how to make their homes more conducive to learning, to growing, and to fulfilling their promise. So that goes outside of education, but we have to put policies in place that address that. Family support centers that deal with parenting education. So we reduce trauma in the home. So that's kind of the trauma thing. But we also have to have those outlets and resources for students who do experience trauma, that we address it quickly, and we're consistent, right? Now that's one of those things, right? I talk sometimes about crisis management, and you need to throw resources at it. With trauma and trauma-informed care, generally, yes, I've got to do the initial, but that means I've got to follow up, right? These students we need to make sure that they're okay, not only today and tomorrow, but a year from now. So those are the types of resources I think we need in our school system to deal with that.
I think what's also really interesting about this too is this idea. You mentioned that Roberta's House, which I didn't know about, so thank you for bringing that to my attention. But also thinking about like how we can have these sort of support centers for families. And I'm really used to this idea of like community schools, where schools are not just, and for many of our schools in Baltimore County, especially in our district, that's what they look like. The schools are not just schools; they really are centers for the entire community. How can we sort of build upon that and make sure that our schools are providing resources, not just academically, but resources for the families in the community, whether that's social services, whether that's providing meals? What plan does the Unity team have for making sure that schools can really be centers for the community and really helping support our families in building a stronger District 10? What does that look like?
So, and you said, what is the District 10 Unity team? Well, one of the things that we have, our secret weapon, if you will, is Speaker Adrian Jones, right? And I look up to the speaker for what she's accomplished. But one of the things that I know she's been a big supporter for, and I'll talk about me, has been, the idea of community schools, PAL centers, funding those centers, bringing additional resources into the school to address communities, right? I know Scotch Branch is the newest school that's about to come on board, a brand new school, and I am certain it will have all types of community amenities in the school, right? Because that's the new concept. It's not really a new concept; it's an old concept that hopefully we're trying to bring back. In my experience, for a number of years, I actually chaired an organization. It started out as the name of it was Friends of the Family. It's now known today as the Maryland Family Network. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is number one, early childhood education, as I mentioned, and bringing students, if not into the schools, connecting them to the schools, their childcare providers much earlier in the process. Because if I do that, I will also connect the parents into the K through 12 education much earlier in the process. I'm a strong believer of, right, really kind of like pre-K and bringing that into the schoolhouse if we had the space, right? Problem is, most of the time we don't have the space, which is a whole nother issue about funding and figuring out how we deal with schools. But in doing that, there was a concept called the Judy Centers. And I've worked closely with the folks that came up with the concept. It was actually Steny Hoyer, who's a congressman out of Prince George's County, Charles County, that area, and his wife was Judy. And that was her concept. And so there are Judy Centers around the state, but there are also Maryland Family Network family centers around the state, some of which are tied to schools today. I'd like to see more of that. So we have resources that we've already allocated throughout the state. It would be great to take some of those resources and put them inside of the schoolhouse. So you're not going from Hernwood Elementary and then you got to go around the corner to the Family Support Center, right? It would be great to begin to co-locate those services.
Yep, absolutely. So you mentioned something really interesting we got to talk about. You mentioned this issue around space, and I'm thinking about this sort of idea around physical space. And it's funny that you mentioned Scotts Branch. That was the first school that I taught at. So I have a big heart for Scotts Branch Elementary. And I know that Kaylin teaches at Hernwood and I'm at Deer Park, but what we're certainly seeing in our community is a growth in population. And so we're starting to see our schools are growing also in population. And so I'm thinking around sort of just what resources can we provide for our schools who are seeing these greater number of students, but maybe staffing doesn't match that. Maybe the resources in the school building aren't necessarily matching the populations that we are being asked to serve because our community is growing so much. How can we support those schools who are really seeing sort of these explosions in student population?
Well, this may go back to really kind of an equity question, right? So often we put money in schools and at the beginning of the year, there's a budget and it's almost fixed, right? But the student population grows. Our corridor is seeing significant growth. We have housing stock that is turning over, right? We had, a lot of baby boomers, but now they're moving off into smaller places and we have families moving in to these houses, which, for maybe the last 10 years were seniors. And so we're experiencing growth in our schools. To address that though, I think we need to, and some of this isn't a legislative thing. I think the schools have really got to begin looking at, do we begin to reconsider boundaries, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to build fast enough to accommodate the students that are here with us today. It pains me. I think the number, and you can tell me because you're there, but it pains me to think that there are somewhere like 7 trailers at Deer Park.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I can remember taking classes in trailers. It wasn't the same.
No.
Right? It's just not the same to have that. So we've got to figure that out. I know that the county executive is working on that. I know that state funding is assisting with trying to address that issue. But right now we continue to be behind, right? The students come and then we build, right?
Yeah.
We've got to figure out how to get in front of that. Some of my time on the planning board, we used to really look at the trends, right? And I can tell you, looking at the trends, you can see what's coming. It has just been difficult to build fast enough, to get the money in the pipeline fast enough. So I don't know that I have a really good answer for you on that one. I just know that we've got to figure out how to balance. And I mentioned this thing about equity. I may be going on and I apologize.
No.
I mentioned this thing about, we talk about equity and what does that look like? So for me, that says if I have a school and it's, Woodlawn Elementary School, And Woodlawn Elementary School is busting at the seams, but I've allocated a certain amount of money. Equity to me says, if I need to allocate more for those children to have an equitable experience, a similar experience to the children in, let's call it Perry Hall, not picking on Perry Hall, or let's stay right in the district and call it, Owings Mills, right? Right, whatever it is, then that's where you put your money. And so part of my role is to keep everybody honest. As an elected official, I'm looking for the constituents to keep me honest and to bring those issues to me. And although I don't allocate funds at the county level, they need to keep me honest so I can go back and I can talk to the council people and I can talk to the county executive and I can make sure they hear what I'm hearing.
I appreciate the sort of this real authenticity and transparency that you've had around like, we can't build fast enough. And I think when I talk to teachers, and even sometimes I'm like, can they just build us a new school, right? But we know that that's not, we can't build a school, we can't just build a new building overnight. So I really do appreciate that sort of honesty around that, around maybe the answer is sort of rethinking our boundaries, and rethinking where we're putting our students and where our students are going, because our community is growing at an incredible rate. And we certainly don't have the space or necessarily the resources to keep up with that. You also mentioned this sort of thing around equity and what our students need. And you mentioned earlier about how COVID has really exacerbated these gaps. And we know that there have always been these gaps, especially for our students of color. And in the last year or so, there's been a lot of conversation among educators around this idea of sort of learning loss. And that because of COVID, our students have lost all this learning. And I don't know if I would call it learning loss. I think it's more of an interruption in their learning. But what can, from a policy level and from certainly an economic level, what can the district do to sort of support us making sure that our students, especially our children of color, are receiving the education that they need and the support that they need to really begin to close these gaps? Because we know that they've really widened. We know that in the last year and a half, 2 years, our students have had just these major interruptions in their lives, academically, socially, and emotionally. And so what can we do to make sure that we're really looking to close these academic gaps, to make sure that our students are on track, especially considering the kinds of skills that we know they need to be successful in the 21st century, sort of having this sort of wide range of skills? What does that look like for you?
For me, that looks like we're going to have to put a little more time in, right? And what I mean by that is we've got to figure out some academic programs that occur after the normal school hour. Yeah. Academic programs that we can do, perhaps we can use some technology. We have to figure out what works best in class things that work, that allow students to remain engaged when they leave the classroom and between the months of June and August, right? In this process of interrupted learning, I like your term better than learning loss. In this process of interrupted learning, we need to then come back to some consistency in my mind, and we need to make up for some of that interruption or some of that loss. And I think the only way we can do that are other support systems. And I know nobody wants to talk about summer school, right? Right, teachers don't want to do it, students don't want to do it, but maybe it's not summer school in the classic sense. Maybe it's we figure out a mini master, and that mini master is taught with, like I said before, maybe it's a 12th grader doing a mini master with a group of 5th graders, right? And we figure out how to compensate them, but that we get back some of that time that we lost, and we get back. Now, clearly that has to be funded. We're going to spend money this summer, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, many of the large jurisdictions with summer job programs, right? And one of the businesses that I'm involved with is food service. And we're going to take a bunch of students and they're going to come in and they're going to work with us over the summer to do summer lunchbox program, right? Which is great. But what if we looked at the same concept and took some of those really bright students and said, we're going to pay you the same way we're going to pay some folks to put lunches together to work with third, fourth, fifth, sixth graders, right? So we got to begin to think about, we have money that we spend every year. Now that would be taking money out of my pocket, right? If I go do that, right? But it's okay, because we have money that we spend every year on different things. One of the things that I think we need to look at as legislators is how can we help those who we appropriate funds to spend the money through policy more wisely.
Well, you know, what I'm really hearing you say, Mr. Phillips, is this idea of centering students. And that's something, like, as an educator, that's really important to me, is how do we center students in all the things that we do? Because obviously, and that's what this conversation is about. You're talking about centering the constituents. How do we make sure that we're really appropriating the money in the ways that they best need? And so I'm thinking about this from like a student perspective. How do we do that for our students in terms of education? And I know you've mentioned more than once tonight about having opportunities for constituents, for you to do the things that we are asking. Like, what is it that we need? And how do we do that for students too, so that they have a voice in their education, or they have the voice in the kinds of programs they want to see in the summer, or the kinds of volunteer work or jobs? How can you make sure that our students are having agency in making policy decisions and also educational decisions?
Well, one of the things we do, and I think Baltimore County has been fair with this, is the student board member, right? So you've got Christian, who I've heard now speak on a couple of occasions. Really impressed last week when he spoke to the county executive and Councilman Julian Jones. So you do have that as an avenue. You know, maybe one thought is in every school, right? You have that group of students who provide that feedback. Perhaps, you know, it goes beyond the student government, but where is that? Where are those sounding boards? Do the administrators, do the teachers have that group of students that they bring in periodically to actually hear from them? And I'm throwing this one out off the top of my head, quite frankly, right? But once again, with this idea of listening to your constituents, I think it's important that we do that, right? And I think as leaders, if we don't figure out ways to get the message from our constituents, then we are not necessarily addressing our constituents' needs.
I love this idea, and it's, you know, lots of schools have their own like little student governments, and my school has them. I don't know what it looks like at the elementary school level, and I know that, you know, they have their sort of own clubs, but I don't know how much those students are really reporting back to their administrators, and how much administrators are really listening, and also just how far that goes in terms of going to the board level either. So I really love this idea, and I think that's something, I would love if that's something that you like really stand on. I know that was off the top of the head, but like, I love this idea of having beyond our student member of the board. And I want to shout out our new one, who is Roa Hassan, for next year, because she's really fabulous.
Okay.
Intelligent, and I love her. So I'm excited because we're coming off of Christian, who was just phenomenal, and then moving into Roa. So Baltimore County students are really in excellent hands. So I'm excited about that, and I love this idea. There's one more question I want to ask you that's a little bit unrelated, but you said something earlier that I just love and think is so powerful. So you mentioned, one, I just want to ask you, can you tell me again about this tie day that you would do? I think you said it was in Middletown. Tell me about that one more time.
So yeah, we came up with all kinds of things, particularly working with boys, particularly working with African American males, and I didn't come up with this one at Randallstown. I did another one at another school, but they would really just have speakers come in, right? And we would talk to the students at Randallstown. We would bring ties if we had them to share with the boys. We would work on teaching them how to tie ties. And the whole idea was this idea of what does a role model look like? What does manhood look like? Does this provide, you know, when you look good, you feel good, you actually act better, right? There's like the psychology behind that. And that changed the behavior of these boys. Another program that I thought was really important, and I did this during my Black Professional Men Days. You know, I'm still involved, but you know, the younger guys are more actively engaged with the students these days. But was this idea of manners, right? And so we did a similar thing to the ties, which was learning how to set a table, learning how to pull out a chair, and really kind of engaging the young boys with learning manners and how to engage with each other. As a matter of fact, I used to love this. At Thanksgiving, right, we would do a meal, and we would prepare the meal, and these were middle schoolers, right? So you think about this, we would prepare the meal, and we would have each one of the young men invite one young lady from their class.
I love it.
Right? And they would, kind of pull the chairs out. They'd be dressed in their ties. They would also do all of the serving of the food. But once again, so some things happen in school and it's academic, right? Other things happen in school, and they should happen in school, that are about life learning, that are about, how do you create individuals who are just good people, good citizens, have a sense of values, a sense of morals. I know the schools can't do everything and be everything for everybody, but I do think we need more of that type of activity in our schools as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this really speaks to this piece around like just student identity, and helping students sort of see their value, especially our Black students. And I'm going to be really specific and call that out. And I say that because it is not lost on us that all the members of the Unity team are Black. And I think that's really important for our district in particular, for District 10 and for the students in our community. And this is sort of unrelated to education, but again, still centering students. What do you think is sort of the value of being a Black man in this role, right? Like this Black man, obviously incredibly intelligent and just doing good work for the community. What value do you see in being this for the students in our community as a Black man, as a Black father, as a Black as a Black scholar, as a Black businessman? Sort of what do you see as the value of sort of occupying this seat in our community?
So unlike some athletes, I do believe there's a responsibility to be a role model, right? And if nothing else, if I can serve as an example for positivity, because that's what I hope I do, then that to me is important, to serve as that example of just being a positive human being, hopefully contributing back to society. It is not only important to Black male students, I think it's important to Black female students, to Latinx students, to white students, to see images that they may not see in their own home, right, of positivity, of just trying to do the right thing and to serve mankind. So that's me. That's what Scott. That's what I'm about, is trying to do that no matter what, every single day. And we don't know how we'll impact people. I've got a number of people that impacted me in my life just by being in my life. Some of which who have gone home, who probably never knew what type of an impact they had on me just by being there. Educators, teachers, administrators. So I was really fortunate in that. And so I hope in some way, shape, or form that the life I live actually exemplifies that, and it's giving something back to somebody.
Of course. And I think I know that I'm really excited about what that will look like for our community, and not just you, but all the members of the Unity team to serve as role models. And I think it's an excellent point that it's not just about our students of color, it's about all of our students, especially even, our white communities, to, just like you said, to see images of what success looks like and what intelligence and capacity and capability looks like. So I'm excited about that. And so I didn't know if you wanted to give an opportunity for the other members of the Unity team to maybe hop in and share a little bit as well.
I do. I'm looking here. Let me see who's, thank you, because I need to figure out, I'm almost positive my friend Jennifer's on here. I got to see this. Yes, and she is. She is. So I'd like to introduce, if I could, my teammate, Miss Jennifer White. There she is, and give her an opportunity to say a few words. Let me just say something about Jennifer. Jennifer is an advocate for health equity, removing disparities. She spent a number of years working at the NAACP in an advocacy role, and she continues in that role today. sometimes, this team, you've got a real broad spectrum. But what I like to say is, I don't want anybody to think that we have not included youthful thought and youthful action. And Jennifer brings that to the District 10 Unity team. So Jennifer, thank you for joining us this evening. I appreciate you jumping on.
Yep.
There you go.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the opportunity as well to share and say hello. And if anything, this has been a very fruitful conversation. And oftentimes these are the same issues that I hear on the doors when it comes to, the issues related to our education system and how we can, if anything, provide a world-class education to our students, create better conditions for our educators, and to make sure that our families are also cared for, where the entire educational ecosystem is balanced and can truly support everyone. So this has really been a great conversation. And if anything, I look forward to engaging further with you. And if anything, congratulations again on your award, Ms. Ross. Well done. If anything, it just illustrates the amazing talent that we have in our schools. And we have to do more to make sure that that we retain the talents and the experience of these high quality teachers. And so I'm just really glad to be here. And again, like you, Scott, my parents, both of my parents are retired public school educators, and I'm also a K through 12 public school graduate. So you're talking about, someone who truly understands and has experienced the importance of in making sure that we make the appropriate and equitable investments in our public school system. You're talking to one right here. So again, what a fantastic conversation. And it was great to be in this fishbowl type of setup. So, so yes.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody who's participated this evening, who's listened in. Of course, we're going to make this available online, so people have an opportunity to listen to it. You can share it with your teachers. But more importantly, I want to thank all of the teachers. What you do is incredibly important. I began Baltimore County Public Schools. I was a Baltimore City public school student as a child. I began Baltimore County Public Schools in, I think it was the 5th grade. And I had a 6th grade teacher by the name of Miss Johnson, who changed the trajectory of my life because she saw something in me and she helped me to see something in myself. So just understand, every day you have the potential of changing the trajectory of someone's life. So we appreciate what you do. We ask you to continue to do it. And we ask you, as you look at this District 10 Unity team, know that you have a team that is supportive of you, supportive of education, and we want the very best for our community, to include our students, our parents, our faculty members, admin, the folks that are driving buses, cafeteria workers. Education is about all of us coming together to make the difference in people's lives. So once again, Brianna, this was a great conversation. We could go on and on. I can tell now you're going to become one of my best friends, Brianna. We're going to have you. We're going to have another conversation like this. Thank you. You're phenomenal for leading this conversation. And I'll turn it over to you to close out in any way you would like.
Yes. Just again, thank you for, I think, this space. I'm always really excited when people want to hear from educators. I don't think we get enough opportunity, not only to be heard, but also then to ask questions. We just do, like Kaylin and I, we go into work every day and we push hard and we do what we got to do. But we also, her and I also know that a lot of decisions get made without our input. And so it's nice to be able to ask those questions and also share what I think our students need, because that's why I show up every day is for our students. And so just to have the space to be able to talk with someone who is also invested in ensuring that education for our students in Maryland and in Baltimore County looks better and looks more equitable and more sustainable is really just very, very exciting. And so I'm excited about the opportunity and the space to just have this conversation. I know we could go on forever because I have like 15 more questions that are circling, but I'll shoot them in an email and I'll save them for later. But thank you, Mr. Phillips. Thank you, Kaylin. Ms. White, I'm excited for the Unity team. I am unified with y'all, so I'm excited about that. Thank you to everybody who came and listened. Please share this. It will be recorded. I don't know, it'll be sent in an email, Kaylin, or how? Yep, okay. It'll be sent in an email. So please share this with the educators that you know in this community and across Baltimore County, because there are just some really good ideas here for all of the districts in our state. So if you know someone, even if it's somewhere else in Maryland, shoot them the recording, because there's some really fruitful and productive, some productive work here that we want to be able to do for all of our students. So thank you, everyone. Kaylin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
This is this last little bit before we let you go. We do have different social media platforms. If you like what you heard today and you're interested in learning more about the District 10 Unity team, as well as any of the candidates that you see here, Ms. Jennifer White and Scott Phillips, Ben Brooks, Adrian Jones. They all have different social media platforms, and so many things are happening daily with the team. If you'd like to keep informed, please feel free to follow any of them or all of them on their social media platforms. If you follow me on anything, I follow him. So it's very easy to find him. I will also be happy to share in follow-ups Miss Jennifer White's platforms as well. But I don't think we're too difficult to find. So please search up the District 10 Unity team and you will see their beautiful faces. And just if you would like to stay engaged, that's a great way to do so throughout this time.
And let me say this. I would be remiss if I didn't get this in. I thank you, Brianna. Thank you, Jennifer. But I have to say thank you, Kaylin, for pulling this together and kind of coordinating the whole thing. I am really blessed to have really smart, great children. And so you handled this really well. Thank you, Kaylin.
All right, everyone, have a great evening.